have that go through a formal selection, but I thought we can open it up and have an open discussion. Any thoughts, comments? Don't all speak at the same time.
I guess Director Cox, I think you're doing an amazing job as the chair. So I would appreciate if you're willing to continue in that role. It sounds like you are. I don't know. That's
no, this is for vice chair. For vice chair.
I understand that, but if we didn't ever vote, I just want to support you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Stepping into the chair role. So thank you for that. And then I would be delighted to nominate someone else as vice chair if someone is interested.
I could volunteer. If there is no other volunteer, I'm happy to volunteer.
Great. So I move that we appoint Director Kaur as the vice chair of this committee.
Great. Can I have a second?
Since I volunteered, Director Cox, I'm sorry, Chair Cox, you may have to do the second.
Okay, well, I'll do the second then.
All right, I'm gonna take
We have the public comment.
yes,
And
we could take a public comment if you would like.
yes, we could do public comment.
There are no public comment on this item, so we can vote.
Okay. Let's take a roll call.
Sounds good. Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Bedoya, Director Gonzalez, Director Kaur,
Aye.
and Chair Cox.
Aye.
Congratulations, you're the new vice chair.
Okay, great. Now we're moving on to item number 5, which is the budget timeline. And this is a informational only item. And so I'll look to the staff to be able to present this presentation. Take it away.
Thank you. Jason Bartlett, Senior Finance Manager. A pleasure to be here today. So each year, AVA's Board of Directors approves the annual budget for the upcoming fiscal year at the June board meeting. Generally, we have preceding meetings before then through subcommittees such as FAP or the XCOM for some review for draft, and also a full draft presentation at May board. This year, the meeting schedules create a situation that may warrant some special treatment and possibly foregoing one of the subcommittee meetings. If you see on this chart, there's a calendar to the left, and there is the XCOM meeting on the 1st of May, the FAP meeting on the 8th, and then the board meeting on the 15th. Going to each of these is administratively difficult in terms of being able to wrap in suggestions and comments and prior to presenting to the May board meeting. So we have come up with a request for FAP. If we could go to the next page, please. That if possibly we could consider an alternative situation where either A, we create a special ad hoc FAP subcommittee meeting specifically for the budget item, perhaps a week or two before the XCOM, so in the end of April, and then have the May FAP meeting as planned with other items. Alternative B is to move the existing FAP subcommittee meeting to that time in April instead of having it in May. And then the third is to not bring the draft budget item to FAP, but bring the item to the May XCOM, as that will allow enough time for recommendations to be rolled into the presentation for the May board meeting. And there is a implied alternative D, which is another situation that suits everyone's needs.
I would just also be clear, the status quo is also okay. Just
Yes.
understanding there's a limitation of being able to turn around and incorporate any feedback into any of those, meetings per se. So
Yeah.
these are alternatives to the status quo.
Yes. Thank you for that color, Howard. That's correct.
So basically what you're saying is that you had a couple options, and our next subcommittee meeting would be on May the 8th, but that may not be enough time
So
to be able to discuss some of the budget information. Is that why we needed to do it earlier?
Yes, the compacting of the three meetings together is, the slide before, please. Makes it very difficult to
Mhm.
administratively incorporate any recommendations from a subcommittee in those tight timeframes. Like 2 weeks from May 1 to May 15th is plenty of time. 2 weeks or 3 weeks from the last Wednesday of April to the board meeting is also plenty of time. It's just this back-to-back weekly agenda is a bit of a sticky widget.
And I would just add that if we have the meetings on the first, the exec com on the first, FAP on the 8th, and the board meeting on the 15th, that is perfectly fine. We can do that. We would just be presenting the same information at each of those.
Correct.
And the benefit of altering the FAP meeting from the currently scheduled date of May 8th to an earlier date is if there's feedback that, suggests that we should alter the budget, then we have some time to incorporate that feedback and then present it, say, XCOM, take that feedback and then adjust and present it to the board.
Yeah.
So I think either are fine. It's sort of dependent on if it's an initial review. So if you feel that we'll just listen to the information and certainly can provide feedback, but we wouldn't incorporate any changes for those following meetings, we can continue with that. But if there's a preference to do it earlier to allow us to actually adjust the initial draft for each of these rounds of reviews, then we can do that. There, of course, will be meetings in June. So nonetheless, we will, of course, incorporate any feedback from these various meetings in the June meetings. So it's not as if we won't incorporate changes, of course.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on item number 5?
yes, we have Director Gonzalez who would like to speak.
Okay,
I'm sorry for the background noise. I would encourage the committee to keep the schedule that it currently has. Keep the meeting scheduled on the 8th. And if there's any large changes that need to be made, you can have the final decision by the board in June. So there'll be some time there to make that final adjustment. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
thank you. I'm going to turn it to, are there any other public speakers?
There are no other public speakers.
Okay, so I'll turn it back to the directors and ask what are their thoughts, comments?
I can go ahead and start, Director Cox, or Chair Cox. I think it's so hard to get these meeting dates on the calendar that I am also inclined to keep the date we have. And I do appreciate hearing from staff in terms of setting our internal expectations accordingly, that there isn't going to be time for substantive change between those meetings. I understand that, and that might be something to look at in the future. But I think at this stage, it would be hard to find a date that works in April. I think.
Okay, and that's Director Anderson, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Director Kaur here. I am agreeing with Director Anderson for the reasons that she has expressed.
Okay. Sounds good. Are we, it sounds like, is there anybody else to comment in the room there?
Nope.
No? Okay. It sounds like we will just stick with the existing next meeting, which is May the 8th. And we'll plan on discussing the budget then, as already on our schedules.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, moving on to item number 6, accounts receivable recovery policy update. And I believe this is Kelly that would be presenting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, Director, and Ava staff, and members of the community. My name is Kelly Brezovec. I'm the Senior Director of Account Services at Ava, and pleased to discuss with you a proposed policy update for our accounts receivable process. All right, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So this is a brief history of this policy. It has historically been called Delinquency and Collections Policy. We're renaming it, and you'll understand why when we get to, in particular, the delinquency part of this. So we had this policy approved back in 2018, and we had intended to put it into place the following year. However, during COVID-19, the state of California paused all collections activities during the state of emergency. So we are taking this time now that all COVID write-off and state funding has been resolved. We're now looking at revisiting this policy in preparation of putting it into operations later this calendar year. So let's go to the next slide. And so what I'll do is, this is the, oh,
Okay.
there we go. So here's the policy as it stands today. So Ava may return delinquent customers, so customers that are late on paying their bills. We may return them to PG&E for non-pay, because Ava would, by maintaining those customers, we would be maintaining the debt that they continue to accrue. To date, we have not returned any customers to PG&E for non-pay. Second, the policy does have some provisions for providing customers with late payment notifications, and also for putting them on payment plans. That's sort of that delinquency part of delinquency and collections. And last, customers with closed accounts and a past due balance are available for collections or recovery efforts. So that's the policy as it stands today. So let's go to the next slide. And now let's pause and take a look at, this is the customer's debt journey from the PG&E perspective, right? So PG&E handles our billing. They handle collection of payments, right? So regular standard payments, those all go through PG&E. If a customer sends a payment to Ava, which has happened in the past, we have to send it over to PG&E or get in touch with the customer and communicate with the customer. Oh, hey, we don't actually, I know we're on your bill, but PG&E handles, they handle all of the billing part of your service, and then we receive payment from PG&E. So here's what happens. Let's just take a look at the residential side, and this is a little bit compressed. There are a couple other actions that take place in here. So day 21 is when your bill is due. So day 21 is 21 days after PG&E has printed the bill, your payment is due. PG&E will also send a notice then if you haven't paid your bill. Now somewhere in here, call it day, in between that day 34, 42, you've gotten another bill from PG&E, right? So you've gotten another bill from PG&E. There's a big red notice on it that says, hey, you're late, please pay your bill. They're also going to start calling you and telling you, you need to pay your bill, we're going to shut you off. They're also going to say, you need to pay your bill, we're going to shut you off. Let's enter you into our payment plan, right? That's how not everyone that has a past due balance is shut off. It's because they're on a payment plan with PG&E. PG&E receives some amount of money, and then they amortize the rest of their bill over the next 3 months to 3 years in some cases. So by the time the customer is eligible for disconnection at day 51, which most customers have entered into a payment plan because they don't want to get shut off, they've already had a lot of communication from PG&E, who is the one that collects the money. By day 95, if the customer has been shut off, they remain shut off, the account is considered closed and the debt is reversed to Ava, meaning that is now our debt to collect on. That bill is ours now. So that's what's going on the PG&E side. So keeping that in mind, let's go to the next slide. So going back to our policy. Today, the current policy says that we can turn customers back to PG&E, meaning they would start to get generation service from PG&E if they have balances over 90 days. Well, 90 days, by that point in time, the customer's already been shut off. So Now, I don't want to send anybody back to PG&E. I don't think anybody at AVA wants to send anybody back to PG&E. However, we're going to have a policy, let's make it a policy that makes sense, right? Which is to remove that 90-day requirement and just state simply that we reserve the right to return customers to PG&E for delinquency. We could also charge them the opt-out fee, which is minimal. It's $5 for residential, $25 for commercial. This is just keeping that in place. I would say most CCAs have a policy like this. There are some of the smallest CCAs that do regularly return customers to PG&E for non-payment. It's not really standard practice for a CCA of our size. But we want to maintain this in case we have an extremely egregious customer debt. And when we start looking into the numbers, you'll see that there are some potential situations out there that we might want to have this ability. Let's go to the next piece of the policy. So this is, eventually look up on the screen. All right, so this is, remember I said, we have in our policy today that we're going to start sending notices and that we're going to put customers on payment plans. And guess what? PG&E does that already. So what is the benefit of us sending a customer a notice? It's limited. And there's a lot of opportunity for errors because a customer could get a notice from us, send a payment to us. If Ava gets a payment, we've got to go back through the channels to talk to PG&E to let them know that the customer sent a payment. Don't shut them off. Payment is en route to you. Also, we could be sending notices and a customer's already paid their bill because it takes some time for all of the information to get back to us. So we're requesting, let's remove this delinquency part of the policy entirely. It's handled by PG&E. PG&E is the billing agent. They are the ones that can set customers up on a payment plan. I'll add here, our customer service reps, they know all of this information. So if you call Ava and you say, hey, I got this thing from PG&E and my bill I'm past due. Our CSR is going to say, give PG&E a call. I can warm transfer you over to PG&E right now. They'll get you set up with a payment plan. Don't worry. So I think let's just simplify this. We don't need to do this. Remove all this from the policy. We're taking this policy that's this long and we're shrinking it down into something that actually is meaningful. So let's go down to the next page. And then this is the recovery process. So this is the part that says if the account is closed and the amount that's overdue is greater than $100, we can refer that to a collections agency. Amounts $100 or less may be written off. We'll talk about the write-off policy later in this meeting. We're proposing, and based on communications with other CCAs, that we actually get rid of that threshold of $100. We think that what we'd like to start with is something like a $10 threshold, and we'll look at the numbers a little bit to see why that makes sense. But the fact that all the others, that there's CCAs that go all the way down to zero makes us think that maybe there's something there in between that sort of $10 to $100 limit, right? So let's take a look at some of the numbers. So first of all, we'll just say like residential debt is 93% of the accounts, so just over half the debt. And let's look at the slide next after this one. Because this one, it's a little bit of an eye chart. I'll just direct your attention using my finger. Sorry, Chair Cox. But so at $100, you can see that yes, $100 lower limit, this is the third row down, does allow us to collect on the lion's share of the arrears. You know, $13 million of the arrears are in that $100 bucket and greater. However, that's just a third of the customers that are in this situation. And so it's possible we would actually have better success in recovering these accounts receivable by lowering that value down to say $10, where we could be sending notices out to 2/3 of customers that have this situation. And we don't know. Maybe we'll actually collect more. We could, collect more because we're collecting on smaller dollar values. So that's why we sort of want to start broad and see how it goes and then move forward from there. So in this slide, you can also see that we looked a little bit at the total arrears and then also looked at the Carefera customer count and our non-Carefera customers. And you do see that there is obviously debt in both buckets. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see what how the differences are, what the differences look like for average and median. So standard is just all residential customers. And then we have Carefera medical baseline and non-Carefera. So our non-Carefera customers do have lower average and median arrears than our Carefera customers. The Carefera customers, maybe they were on a payment plan longer and they were able to rack up more debt. It's hard to say exactly why that is, but the average debt is higher for Carefera customers. We expect to keep an eye on this and see what our recovery efforts look like across different customer groups. And then also a little bit of a preview for the next slide, non-residential customers obviously have a significantly higher arrears and higher median arrears as well. So we go to the next slide. Here's where you can see, this is where the bulk of our debt is, or a significant amount of our debt is coming from the non-residential sector. You could make the argument that we should have a different threshold here for our non-residential customers. I would argue from an operations perspective, I want the same threshold for everyone, make it easy, make it implementable. And so here's where, it still doesn't make sense to have that $0 or that dollar threshold, right? Now you're paying more money to collect than you're actually collecting. But that $10 threshold, if we can get some $10 recovery efforts, that's better than $0. So if we go on to the next slide, just in conclusion, we have about $28 million in terminated account arrears. 26.5 of that is available for recovery. If we were to recover 20% of that, which is, I think, a little bit ambitious, would be great. We're going to do our best. We'd be reducing that to about $21 million. And if we are able to continue to recover, we'd be reducing that amount that we would have to write off. As I said, Jason will discuss later on in this meeting, and recognizing an additional $3 million towards our bottom line. So for this meeting today, I'm looking to get some feedback on the proposed policy changes before we bring this to the full board to vote on the updated policy.
Thank you. I'm going to go and turn to public comments first. Are there any comments? Public speakers?
We have no public comment at this time.
Okay, then I'll turn it back to open up the discussion with our members here. Any clarifying questions, comments, or feedback?
I can go. Thank you,
Okay, Director Anderson?
Thank you. I guess I don't know enough about debt collections to understand the economics of going after smaller amounts.
Mhm.
It seems to me like that's diminishing returns.
Mhm.
So I'm really struggling with this idea of collecting a $10 debt.
Oh, okay. I think it's just customers might be more, you might send out $10 notices and
Mhm.
receive $10 back from
Mhm.
everyone because, oh, it's $10. I didn't realize I had that debt. Versus one notice to send $100. What? Am I going to pay $100? Right? So it's just kind of playing the odds a little bit of you're spreading it out. You're sending this out to more customers or more former customers in an attempt to recover.
I would also just note that as a follow-up to this, we will go seek a third party to do this,
Yeah.
provide the service and actually go try to recover AR. And my understanding is they take on those costs. So
Yep.
they get a portion of what they are able to recover.
Yes.
And so we're not making an economic decision around like, what is the cost of this mailer or whatever. That's really on them, and they give us an estimate. I mean, they'll share an estimate, of course, of what they think they can recover, and I think ballpark, what, 20% or something like that is the rough estimate. And so, but we're not billed for their service at the end of the day. They
Right.
just take a portion of what they recover. So if we lower that threshold,
Yeah.
they may still say, we don't want to actually go make that effort to go seek
Well,
that.
that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, but it's sort of their decision from an purely economic standpoint. We're just determining what we're actually sharing with them to say, this is
Right.
something we're passing on to you to consider. So, yeah.
And setting our policy such that when we are working with these experts, they can assess, they can tell us sort of what is the best,
Yeah.
what their best practice. When we did speak with other CCAs, there certainly were other CCAs that say, oh yeah, we send out collections notices for 25 cents for whatever amount, and had success doing that.
Chair Cox, can I ask another question, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so
Go for it.
My next question is in terms of just a customer's credit rating.
Mhm.
My understanding is when you send something out to collections, that's when it kind of is a ding on the creditworthiness of the customer.
And we do have the ability to, we were also concerned about that.
Right.
In particular for some of our lower income
Yes.
customers. And we have discussed internally that we would be able to structure the agreement with an agency such that it does not have an effect on their credit score.
Do we have control over that though? I'm not sure. I mean, it sounds like, I'm not sure we would have control over that.
Well, we don't have personally identifiable information for these customers.
I see.
So I think it would actually potentially be challenging for an
I see.
agency to hit someone's credit score, given that I don't have access to a customer's social security number,
Okay.
for example,
Right.
something that you would really need in order to hit the credit score.
I think our intent is to make it so
Yeah.
it does not impact their
Mhm.
credit
Yeah.
score.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I'm
Mhm,
troubled
mhm.
by
Yeah.
is this idea that you would be adding to someone's in arrears, the opt-out fee. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just that to me is just like salt in the.
Yeah.
So especially if we're talking about lowering the threshold to $10 and then the opt-out fee is
Oh, another
$5 of that, like, I mean, it just seems to me like we're getting a little too granular. In a way that might not be super constructive.
That's helpful feedback.
I don't think we have, historically, we have not charged that opt-out fee. It's just
Okay.
a part of the policy that we have discretion to charge that, and that's mostly in the context of, I think, non-debt circumstances. So if a customer just wants to
Okay.
opt out, which
And-
they have historically,
yes.
the small percentages have,
Sure.
and we've still not charged that, but as a part of policy, at least we have that discretion to do that.
Right.
But you're suggesting that for these customers that they are not opting out voluntarily, that perhaps
Correct.
we do not assess that fee. Okay.
Director Carr, did you have any comments?
I would like to thank Kelly for the presentation. Thank you for doing that. And I actually do like the idea of streamlining it through a third party. So, we can give them a percentage of what is recovered.
Any other comments?
Thank you. None.
Okay, great. I think we've kind of hit upon the high points there for this type of service for accounts receivable to be recovered. I think one thing is kind of designing out the scope of work, but also understanding if you're going out for some sort of solicitation to turn into a contract, I assume that you'll be looking at the people that are the specialists in this type of collection. At the same time, how is that impacting the staff? Currently, if this was to be brought on as a third-party service, a collection service, how does that impact the staff currently? Would you have to hire some additional people to manage that type of contract and other third-party staff that would come with it? could you help me understand a little bit of that piece? As what your what your vision or what your expectations are?
Yeah, so if this was brought on as a third-party service, then on our end, it would be more contract management, which we have the capacity to manage. I don't anticipate hiring additional staff to do this work in-house. Because as has been pointed out, this is not our area of expertise. And so we are also in communications with some of our existing providers who do, who have this sort of work already in their services, to see if there's a way to work together, work collaboratively.
I would just add, there are some fairly established, third parties that do this work,
Yep.
very credible, very turnkey. So I think a solicitation would be able to identify some of the key differences between those providers and the price, and allow us to do it with fairly limited
Yeah.
work
Yes.
associated on
Yep.
on our staff's time.
Yeah, I think there would be some startup sort of work associated with it, and then at some minimal ongoing efforts. Things may change, but that's my expectation.
Okay, that sounds good. I do have concern about us trying to not have the impact, as the other Director Anderson had mentioned about the credit. Since I look to Experian and some of the other big names as kind of the dominance and setting the record for reporting those things, I would be a little weary to kind of put that as a guarantee with the customers that it wouldn't impact their credit score report. That would be my only, I guess, feeling comfortable with some sort of disclosure on that part, since that's not our core of operation or certification in that area. I think the other part is, in some cases, with this, I would also be wary of some of the customers that may have medical situations, and even though they may be delinquent, and how we can still carry out something so they don't have anything at all to keep their medicine cold or at the proper temperature. That's my only concern of a humanity type issue there, on how to deal with the sensitivity of those parts. Or they're seeking other types of funding or other grants or something to help subsidize those that are in need in that arena.
Yeah, certainly, Chair Cox. Ava does not have we don't do shutoffs, right? That is PG&E. So I think what our response, for those customers that are maybe having hardships, is to continue to direct them to resources, be that at PG&E or at another. There's a local agency in Hayward that can help out with additional bill credits for customers that are having hardship.
Or probably collectively, all of our cities would have something as a referral or some sort of resource, I guess, be provided to those, because I think each one of us have our own human services or community services departments.
Yes.
So that would probably make sense to be able to direct that in that case. Are there any other comments from other directors? If not, I can't remember if I asked for public comments or not.
You did, but we do
I
have
did.
for public with their hand raised, if you would like to recognize them.
Yes, I would like to recognize them.
Sounds good. Local Clean Energy, you recognize for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Board Member Cox. I wanted to just share, back in like 2021, I remember we were advocating for kind of a debt relief program. And the agency did respond with doing bill credits, I guess, that came from funds that came from the state, and recognizing that we were in a unique situation with the shutdown and COVID-19. But I do think a program like that would be still important. And one of the main components of the program was to continue funding community-based organizations to do outreach in Ava community territory to make sure that we're helping community people, low-income people, and folks who might not even know where to access resources, such as LIHEAP, which usually pays towards somebody's owed costs on the bill and then brings them up to date so that they don't get shut off and then they don't get pushed back to PG&E. And then other programs that exist because it requires a lot of navigation, and not to mention the people that ask for these services aren't always English speakers or literate. And so having a program like that that's ongoing is really important to preventing losing such customers. And so I want to kind of uplift that idea and that program and emphasize that it should be an ongoing program and not solely one and done, because you know, debt relief and just energy debt is a real ongoing issue for the lowest income community beyond our territory. So I wanted to uplift that. And I guess that's it, because that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. At this point,
Chair Cox?
yes,
Director Anderson, may I ask a follow-up based on the input from the Clean Energy Alliance and representative who just spoke? There was a question.
absolutely.
Thank you. There's a question that arose in my mind. So one of the things we've discussed in the past and that Ava Community Energy has been involved with is end of year sort of waterfall, accounting waterfall. And so my question would be, how does that impact some of these potential delinquent accounts for ratepayers?
Yeah, sure.
I can probably answer that one.
Okay.
So through the course of the year, we net out what we estimate to be uncollectible amounts based on trends, and you know, we follow very closely the data. And so that does reduce revenues through the year, and any collection effort on this would then increase those revenues.
I don't think that's her question exactly. I think she's referring to our surplus waterfall and how that may be applied. And so the surplus waterfall is applied to active accounts.
Yes.
At the time that we finalize the audit and know what the surplus is exactly, and then we provide that to active.
So if you have an active account that is in arrears, it would potentially
Yes.
be helpful.
Absolutely.
To your
And-
own bottom line as a household
Yes.
residential
Yeah.
ratepayer. But
And
if
for
it's-
these recovery processes that we're
You're
generally
past
speaking
that.
to, these are terminated accounts.
These are,
already.
okay.
Yeah, they're
They've been
already
returned.
I see.
Right.
So they haven't been
Okay.
able to take advantage of the.
Right, maybe they did
Correct.
the
So
year
these
before.
bill credits would not, yeah, they may have received it in the past, but yeah,
Okay.
if they're not an active account, then they would not.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yes, for
Thank you, Chair Cox.
the ongoing credits.
Okay, any other comments? So it sounds like in summary that Ava Energy would go out for RFO for a third-party collection agency. And it sounds like we do have a somewhat of agreement among the directors of if there's hardship, that we would direct them back to resources, whether it's at the local cities of the Human Services Department. And also a possibility of even, you know, in the group check in to see if there's any other debt relief or grants or things like that. And we would do our best not to have them go back to PG&E. Is that kind of the other summary part? Did I capture that correctly, or do I stand corrected, fellow directors?
No, I think, Chair, I think you summed it up. I think we would also raise the point about the opt-out fee that we were assured by staff that that's not something generally we charge to delinquent.
It would not be charged.
Accounts.
We can modify the policy so that it is not charged to customers that are involuntarily leaving. our
Correct,
service.
because it's not an opt-out. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
It's not a mandatory, is what we're trying to say.
Right.
It's at our discretion,
It is.
looking at each case. So we could certainly add that part in, that the opt-out fee would be a case-by-case basis or something like that.
It is at a discretion to sort of clarify, are you asking us to explicitly say we will not?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't today, and I don't think we intend to, but the policy is written to give us some level of discretion,
To
so I just want to
clarify,
clarify.
a
right?
voluntary opt-out does receive the $5 or $25 fee
Okay.
today. And I think this would be a different situation because rather than being a voluntary action on behalf of the customer, this would be a involuntary action taken by Ava.
Correct.
So it is it's a different act, right? It's not
Yes.
the customer choosing to leave our service. It's Ava saying, you're not paying your bills.
It's really PG&E saying you're not paying.
Well, it's really
Well,
PG&E
we
saying
would
you're not paying your
terminate-
bills,
They
right?
are terminating the account and they are sending back the debt to us.
Right, but if before that point, if we notice that a customer is just egregiously, a commercial customer, let's say is egregiously not paying the bills, racking up thousands of dollars in debt, and prior to that 90-day disconnection, 70-day disconnection, we choose to send them, say, we're not going to be your generation provider anymore because you're just creating debt. That is the instance where I think it's involuntary, therefore maybe we could remove that. We have the ability to charge an opt-out fee for those customers.
I'm comfortable with that. I mean, as long
Okay.
as we're not cutting off a revenue stream, but it sounds like we're not cutting off a revenue stream because we're not ever
We're
charging
not.
it.
Right. And in general,
Right.
I'm not in the business of taking customers off of our service.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So opt-out fee is voluntarily reviewed and at the discretion of Ava.
But you want it.
I think.
Is that how we were trying
Not
to?
to belabor it. I think the point I was trying to make is actually that we could change the policy so that we're not actually, that we're only charging an opt-out fee when it is truly voluntary.
Okay,
Because otherwise
that's
it's like
when
we're
they charge
just
it.
piling on to a negative debt situation.
Right. You
And
wouldn't
is there
recover it
any-
anyway.
Is that for commercial and residential? Is that for only care customers? Is that for all customers?
I could leave that up to staff. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion if you
Okay.
feel like.
I'll take a look at it.
So we'd have an opt-out fee that's charged voluntary and at the discretion of Ava. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay. So at this time, since this is an action item, then we would need to have a motion.
Chair Cox, is it really an action item or because we
think
have
you
some,
did.
there was some discussion in the beginning that we're really just providing input.
Yeah.
To,
So is this really informational? Because on the agenda, it says action item.
I think there's a number of items like this that we're seeking specific action to approve sort of the policy that we've put forth. And then we are bringing all the items that are action items, we're ultimately taking to the full board for formal approval, but at least in terms of.
I think there's a recommendation. I think that's what we have is a recommendation that we're bringing
Yes,
forth.
Yes.
Okay, I'll make a note of that.
so I'm comfortable, Chair Cox, making a motion to recommend changes to our accounts receivable recovery policy as outlined by staff and as discussed here today.
I will second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and second. And now clerk, can you please do roll call?
Yes, Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Core,
Aye.
Chair Cox.
Aye,
The recommendation is moved.
great. Thank you so much. That concludes our discussion on item 6, and now we'll move on to item 7, which is the aged account write-off policy.
Yes, thank you, Jason Bartlett, again here presenting on this one. This is related to the recovery policy that we just discussed. And our recommendation here is to approve moving this forward to the board, of course, with any directional input. So if we can go to the one after this. Great, thanks. So Ava tracks unpaid and delinquent accounts on its books as a balance in our accounts receivable line item on our financial statements. This balance is held indefinitely and accumulates over time. And the balance has been reduced on 2 instances of when we've received California Arrearage Payment Program monies. The first was in 2022 for for federal funds, and then in 2023, we did receive some for state funds. The total of that, I believe, was around $11 million between both deliveries. And this went directly to reduce specific customer accounts. We had to show that this was, that these people, that these accounts were aged with certain criteria, and that they qualified for this payment program. The funds were applied, and it reduced their balances on their bills, and it also reduced our aging balance. There have been no other instances of reducing the AR balance, and so we're here to try to determine a process to write off truly uncollectible balances. The proper accounting to treatment for unrecoverable debt requires a consistent methodology to apply this systematically and regularly to balance in that AR line item. There is a caveat here that under California state law, AVA is allowed to pursue, doesn't say must, but we are allowed to pursue aged balances in accordance with a board-approved recovery policy, which we just talked about. And there are certain unrecoverable balance that if they meet certain criteria, we can just write off and not even send to collections. So if we can go to the next slide. And there we are. So this write-off policy for aging accounts establishes that consistent methodology that we're looking for. And it is in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And specifically, an account must meet at least one of the following criteria for an aged balance to be written off. First, it must be terminated. And a terminated account is defined as an account that is no longer under service by AVA. That means it can still be under service by PG&E, but it is no longer being provided service by us. The date of aging, if it's greater than 4 years, we are not allowed to I think that the correct terminology is to aggressively pursue, meaning we can't actually send notices to people once it hits a 4-year threshold. And terminated accounts with a balance above the minimum threshold that we discussed on the last item, which we're estimating at $10 for now, may meet additional requirements that if it's in accordance with best practices and receivable policies, we can write it off if it is still above that minimum threshold that we're looking at. And of course, terminated accounts with a balance below that minimum threshold would be automatically written off. Next slide, please. The immediate write-off of accounts aged more than 4 years would result in an immediate reduction of about 1.9 million in our AR balances. That is how much aged debt is before March of 2020. Over the next year, each month, approximately $121,000 of these accounts will reach that 4-year mark. There exists a total, this was discussed on the previous item, about 26 million in unrecoverable payments from terminated accounts that are eligible that have not yet met this 4-year requirement. And on total in our AR balance, there's about 40 million of uncollectible debt overall. And that additional 40 million is active accounts. There will be no material impact on the financial statements, as this amount has already been accounted for in uncollectibles and net revenues. There will be an adjustment on the net revenues on the budget statement, which, as we said earlier, will go into the surplus waterfall for active accounts. And so we're asking that we get feedback from this subcommittee on possible recommendations, concerns, or items, and help us proceed to get this in front of the board.
Thank you very much for your report. I'm going to first find out if we have any public speakers that are wishing to comment on item number 7.
Yes, we have one member of the public with their hand raised. Director Gonzalez, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
So very quickly, my approach on this would be to endeavor to write off relatively soon, whether it's 180 days, a year, the concept that we're holding on to the possibility of collecting 3 and 4 years out, I think would be non-standard practice. And so I just encourage an earlier write-off point. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez. If I may reply to that. One, as we, when we go to RFP to find a suitable agent to recover on our behalf, our conversations with other CCAs and with some preliminary agents and stuff is that there is that established in the collections process or the recovery process. And, we want to leave the policy a little bit flexible to kind of meet what their recommendations are. But yes, that is addressed implicitly in the process.
Thank you very much. And now I'll turn it to the directors that are present. Any comments, feedback, clarification?
Yeah, Chair Cox, this Director Anderson, I'm comfortable with this.
Okay. Director Kerr?
Likewise, I'm comfortable with this as well.
Okay. And I feel the same. So at this point, we'll go ahead and have if there's not any other discussion, we'll go ahead and I'll call for a motion.
I can make the motion, Chair Cox. I move that we, what did I say last time? What was the verb I used last time?
Recommend.
Yes, it was recommend. Thank you
You
very
could go
much.
back to the
I move
recommendation
that
there.
we recommend that the aged account write-off policy as set forth in the staff report and as described here today be moved forward to the full board.
Thank you.
Great.
Second.
Director. Okay. It's been probably moved and second, and now we'll do a roll call.
Director Anderson. Director Core.
Aye.
Chair Cox.
Aye.
It's approved.
It's approved on the recommendation. And now we're moving on to item number 8, the renewable surplus allocation and GASB 62 methodology.
Great. I will present on this one. You can jump to the next slide, Raisa. The quick background on this is in the fiscal year 2022 to 23 budget surplus, or I should say budget process, the board approved allocation of our surplus towards long-term renewable energy and clean storage investments. That number was finalized to be roughly $10.5 million. That number was presented to the full board at the November 15th meeting that was following our financial audit. And we retained that amount of money in our GASB 62 fund. Quick reminder, the GASB 62 fund is a accounting treatment that allows us to defer revenues from one period to another to when costs are actualized. And so we've retained that amount to be allocated towards some number of projects or megawatt hours. So we are presenting here on a proposal to utilize that surplus in an allocation methodology and accounting treatment associated with it. Next slide. Just a really quick summary. As you all have heard, we're in sort of the tail end of an RFO process for wholesale energy procurement and storage. At the outset, we targeted up to 1,000 megawatts of nameplate capacity for generation and up to 500 megawatts of nameplate capacity for storage. What we've brought forward to the board and executed as of today's date is 475 megawatts of generation capacity and 75 megawatts of storage capacity. And so what that equates to is roughly 700 to 900 gigawatt hours of renewable energy production. So that's what we've signed, or had approved and signed. Next slide, Raisa. We are continuing to try to close out negotiations that have been a part of that 2023 RFO process. We're at the tail end there. And we have a few additional projects that we're hoping to close out by the end of April. What we're presenting here is that we are estimating roughly 700 to 950 additional gigawatt hours that could come from there. The reason why it's a range both here and on the prior slide is because obviously renewable energy generation is intermittent. And so we're providing sort of a forecast on sort of the guaranteed energy production and sort of best estimate production of what we'll receive. So that's why it's presented as the range. Our proposal here, our recommendation here is to allow us to allocate that $10.5 million surplus towards this incremental generation. And we are seeking that feedback now prior to closing out negotiations because we want to know if we have these funds to allocate towards those projects or not, as it may have some impact on how we close out the negotiations, whether we've deemed those projects favorable enough in terms of the terms, pricing, et cetera. And so our view is it's better to look at that on a portfolio basis as opposed to on an individual project basis so that we kind of have some level of flexibility as we're closing out those negotiations. The last point I'll make here is our recommendation is to apply the surplus, assuming we receive approval to apply it in this manner, is to do the allocation and apply it, understanding that there's always development risk within our broader procurement portfolio for project development, construction risk, interconnection risk. There are a variety of reasons that projects ultimately fall out. We obviously hope that does not occur, but in a large portfolio, of course, there's always project development risk to anticipate. And so our recommendation have some level of certainty in terms of the allocation and apply it towards the broader portfolio that was procured through the 2023 RFO. Next slide, Raisa. This is an eye chart, of course, but just highlighting and summarizing all the different PPAs that we have already signed and providing a quick status update on those for context more than anything else. But we don't need to walk through this chart. It's there for reference. And then the last slide here. This is proposed very simplified accounting treatment for that $10.5 million. Our recommendation is to release that based off the forecasted project online dates. We anticipate those to be in 2027, so a few years from now. That sort of roughly aligns the start of the PPA contract. There are some alternative approaches here. You could deem to release them now. You could release them in 2027 and actually release them in smaller amounts over the course of, say, 15 years, which would align to the tenor of the PPA itself. We're recommending a more simplified approach of just releasing the $10.5 million at once in 2020, what we project to be 2027, so the anticipated project online dates. In discussions with our accountant, there's no rule as to what needs to be done here. GASB 62 has some level of flexibility and discretion for the board to set a policy and approve it. And so what we as staff need and want is explicit direction from the board to say this is an approved policy, and so therefore do this with the accounting treatment. There's no right or wrong in terms of guidance that our accountant has provided. The benefit of doing it just all at once is really just operational ease. It's $10.5 million, which is obviously not an immaterial amount, but in the grand scheme of things with our budget, it's not hugely material. So the idea of doling that out over 15 years at less than $1 million is relatively immaterial. And so therefore it would be easier operationally just to sort of release it all at once. But at least the 2027 timeframe does better align with the anticipation of those projects coming online. So that's the basis for this recommendation. And that's it.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, who was the staff that just reported that? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Howard.
Oh, that was Howard. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Howard.
Just did a few in this lens.
Yes, Yes. I would first like to call if there's any members of the public that are wishing to make comments.
There are no members of the public with their hand raised.
Okay. And since we have no speakers, I'm going to turn it back to the directors and get their feedback, clarification. Any questions? Do I see a hand raised there, Director Anderson?
There's, feel like we're going in alphabetical order here. So a couple questions. One, I hear that, Herb said that you talked to the accountants, our accountants, and they don't have a super strong opinion. Do our auditors have an opinion? I mean, is this something that we should be checking with our audit partners to say, how would you recommend that we deal with this?
I'll ask Jason to chime in if he has any additional thoughts on that, but I think our accountant has taken that into account. So there really is flexibility with how we treat this, as long as there is some formality around it. It is important that staff is not just using discretion rather release that, but rather we seek direction from the board. And I think our accountant has given us that feedback. Is as long as that's formalized and approved, we can operate however the board advises us. Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a little more specificity is that because the board has approved the GASB 62 as an option, the board has discretion over how it is released.
Got it. And then as far as, creating policy for going forward, is the determination of how we do that, with this specific surplus then going to be applied in the future, or next year or the following years, if we're in the same situation, are we going to be looking back and saying, this is how we did it previously, and so this is how we need to keep doing it?
Well, so this is approval just on this allocation, and so it does not necessarily explicitly state this is a policy and this is how we would always utilize these funds. I will note in our current budget, in our current year, 23-24, we do not have this within the surplus. It was initially proposed in the budget setting process. And as a quick reminder, the board gave us direction to come back in January at the mid-year cycle to further clarify how we want to allocate that surplus. And there was, some discussion around bill credits versus resilience hubs versus this, and that direction actually pulled it away from this similar allocation towards long-term renewable energy. So we don't have that in this year's budget. That's not to say in the future we couldn't propose that again and approve it, but we're taking that as some direction that at least in the short term, that's not of interest.
Okay. Director Kerr, did you have any comments?
I'm in agreement with the recommendation, and I could do a motion to that effect if there are no further comments.
Okay, I did have one or two clarifications. I guess regardless, we would pay out less than $1 million for the 15 years. We would release the 10.5 million and change in 2027. Is that what my understanding is?
That is the recommendation, correct? Yeah.
Okay, now what happens as we think about releasing this surplus? And I see here on the portfolio list that there's a couple of developments that for whatever reason are delayed, and then some are in the future that will be brought on. Is there any impact on that surplus, or would more money go to some that may be behind schedule to help them move along if there's some other things going on with those projects? I'm just trying to understand with this lump sum of money, if there's any uneven or way to look at if there's some impact with the projects. Is that going to take more of the surplus for that year versus some of the other projects, or is it just flat out spread over all of the things in the general fund?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think for simplicity, because of the number of projects that we have within our portfolio, and that's part of the reason that we did want to provide that for context, is there's obviously a number of contracts that we have. We are continuing to sign additional contracts, both from this RFO, and over the next few years, we will obviously add on top of this. So the portfolio list is getting fairly long, as is obviously necessary to meet our clean energy targets. And so we believe it would be overly complex to try to take that $10.5 million and start to allocate it to very specific projects. The way we contract is we understand there's project risks, and so we anticipate there will be some level of fallout in terms of the projects that we've contracted with. And so it would be, I think we would advise it to to do it this way, so it's broadly allocated to our portfolio, and let's release the funds. We've made approvals and decisions on the basis of we want to sign these contracts, and some fall out. There's still, ultimately we still have our load requirements and our clean energy targets, and so we're going to sign more projects, and we're going to hit our targets, as opposed to allocate it to a single project and imply that that's the only project that gets the surplus, and if that project happens to not come online, then we have to make a different decision with the surplus. Seems more challenging and more complicated, which is why we are suggesting let's approve it towards a portfolio of projects, identify incremental megawatt hours that we are intending to negotiate, and move forward with that level of certainty and timing for when we release those surplus funds. I will note, if we don't actually sign any more PPAs here on out for some reason, of course, there are negotiations and terms that we still need to close out in order to agree to, wanting to move forward on some PPAs. We would defer on the surplus. Most likely would come back to the board and say, we're going to go back with a next RFO later this year, and we'll account for the fact that we still have this surplus to allocate.
Okay. That makes sense. And for the ESA, could you spell that out, what that acronym means?
The energy storage agreement.
That is correct.
Oh, energy storage. Okay, got it. Where the other one is the power
Purchase agreement.
power purchase. Okay. Okay, great. Are there any other comments? Are we ready for making a motion?
Motion to approve the recommendation on item 8.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. And so now I'm going to ask the clerk to take roll call.
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Court,
Aye.
Chair Cox.
Aye. So this will conclude our discussion on item number 8, and now we'll move on to item number 9, the Treasury Manager Selection and Investment Policy. And I will have the staff go ahead and present.
Hi, thank you, Jason Bartlett again. This is a combination of two very interrelated items that we intend to bring to the board. And so please go to the next slide. So there are two recommendations. One is to approve the selection for Treasury Manager to go to a board for vote. And the other is to provide guidance, feedback, or approval to the draft investment policy that we are submitting. So next slide, please. So in November of last year, the Board of Directors approved the allocation of an additional $75 million to reserves, bringing the balance to approximately $231 million. AVA is expecting an additional $100 million contribution with this fiscal year at the end of the audit next year. Currently, reserves are held in vehicles with limited rates of return and limited management options. They are held in ICS accounts and CDARs and a money market. Each of these have limitations and caps and other regulations around them in terms of balancing and what, like how much each can be funded and how much each can be applied. The next slide, please. So in October of last year, we issued an RFP for qualified treasurer managers to assist with the management of these reserve funds. We received 4 submitted responses: Chandler Asset Management, PFM Asset Managers, PNC Financial Services, and Raymond James. All proposals were reviewed, and the top 2 scoring responders were interviewed in person. Evaluations overall were based on the following groups of criteria: qualifications being one of the lead among them, compliance and controls, their approach to treasury management, cost and pricing was also considered, as well as client services and reporting. We also looked pretty sternly at references and additional supporting filing and documentation that is required by the industry. PFMAM scored the highest in both the review and the interview. Next slide, please. So with that, we are bringing PFMAM. And we have with us today Monique Spike, who is the lead advisor on this project. She has been with PFMAM for over 20 years, and her supporting staff of 6 has over 100 years of combined experience together. They are an investment advisory and fiduciary registered with the US SEC and a subsidiary of US Bancorp Asset Management. The firm has 43 years of specializing in California public agency investment management with 215 billion in assets under management over 180 government clients. 565 million of that is for 7 public energy agents and CCAs, including Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. They also are advisors for multiple AVA constituents, including the City of Albany, City of Fremont, and the City of Hayward, and they are original sponsors to Cal CCA. And so that's the high level introduction. And with that, I would, can we go to the next slide, Teresa? Right, so there is more here, but I think if Monique has any additional insights.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here today. Really wanted to highlight the California Government Code experience. We've been managing assets for California public agencies or agencies like yourself who are limited to the California Government Code since 1989. It's a very limited investment universe, a very unique subset of investment rules for California government agencies, but we do believe there are lots of opportunities to enhance the return that you're getting in the portfolio over and above what you're earning with the banking products. I do want to emphasize that, although we're looking to move beyond deposit style products, the investment options are still fairly conservative. California Government Code, just as an example, generally limits agencies to investments within 5 years, and also limits you to very high quality fixed income products. So we're looking forward, if you approve the investment policy and our appointment as a treasury manager, to really sort of driving value and adding value to your investment program. A couple of things that were in the presentation that Jason didn't get a chance to highlight is really our consciousness about risk management. We treat each and every client, we act as a fiduciary. We have a culture of compliance and really looking to work with your staff to ensure that the investment is reflective of not only your risk tolerance, but also your goals and mission of the organization. So we'll really be looking forward to moving forward and adopting some of these strategies that we've talked to staff about during the RFP and process.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. Some additional insights. Reza, if we could return to the presentation, please. One of the things that was really impressive from our viewpoint of PFMAM, where it kind of stood out, is that all investments are reviewed by committee prior to execution and overseen by the chief investment officer of the organization. All investments mandates are monitored weekly and compliance checks are done daily to assure account balances are in accordance with state guidelines. They also have a culture of compliance, and they integrate that into all their systems with automated protocols, pre and post trade reviews, and reporting transparencies. They work primarily with US Bank, where we hold a credit facility, but they also have working relationships with about 20 other custodians, and so mobility is not necessarily a hindrance here. They are committed to socially responsible investing on behalf of municipal clients and can leverage full environmental and sustainable goal management with options available. They offer full reporting to client services, including presentations to the board on quarterly basis. They're fully compliant with all SEC regulations, filing, and protocols since inception. And they submitted a very competitive bid. So the operations would look like the scope of work would include, but not necessarily be limited to, working with staff to develop a comprehensive and inclusive investment policy, which we'll show you in a minute. Continuous assessment of investments with regards to all regulations and our approved investment policy, our board approved investment policy. Assess market risk of investments and provide regular reporting. The treasury manager will have no direct access to our accounts, but will track, report, and advise on investment balances, transactions, returns, and determine benchmarks. US Bank will be the custodian. In Ava, as I mentioned earlier, we currently hold a $200 million credit facility with them. And so the estimated costs for this service at our current reserve balance of 231 million is about 151,000 per year. And costs would increase by about $35,000 per 100 million of additional monies set to reserves for management. And that's 0.35 basis. So the investment policy provides a standard investment policy. We've provided one for initial review. The objectives of the policy are in this order specifically: safety, to preserve the capital in our overall portfolio; liquidity, to ensure that we can meet any reasonably anticipated operating requirements; and then return on investment, to attain a market rate of return, which will be measured against established benchmarks. Staff has added a section on social responsible investing, prohibiting Ava from investing in companies whose primary business involves one or more of the following activities, which is fossil fuel extraction, refining, distribution, tobacco manufacturing and production, and firearms manufacturing. All authorized investments are compliant with federal and state policies and guidelines for government entities. Next slide, please. I guess that's it. So this provides a summary of our staff recommended treasury manager selected through RFP, and a draft investment policy to put into action upon signing. And so we look to this committee to provide any guidance, insight, recommendations, concerns, or anything to that matter that may help get this item to the board.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And I'm going to first turn it over to see if there's any members of the public that are wishing to make a comment on this item number 9.
There are no public comments at this time.
Okay. Since we have no public speakers, then I'm going to turn to our directors and see if they have any clarification, feedback, or any comments. Don't all count at once.
Go ahead.
I was going to, I'm sorry, Director Anderson, I didn't know if your hand was raised. I can't see right now.
It's always raised. I just can't help myself, but I'm comfortable if somebody else wants to go first.
Please go ahead. I appreciate the information that was provided, and I could ask follow-ups, but I have no questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. I definitely appreciate this. I'm really excited that we're going in this direction. I think having professional management of our reserve is a really good idea. And I think the board is going to generally be supportive about it. I think the questions that are going to come up with the full board will have to do with the range of fees and kind of the competitive nature, wanting to make sure that we're in line in terms of our fee structure with what other similarly situated clients are paying. So that'll be a question I think will come up. And then my next question was looking at the limited, and I really appreciate that, the limited range of investment options. How would we ever be in a situation where we'd be investing in fossil fuels or I just trying to think of examples of how that would even come up in the context of the parameters given.
That's a good question. And, when I say limited, we're often talking to boards and other oversight bodies who, are used to equities and, hedge funds and alternatives being options. Here, we're just looking at basically high quality fixed income instruments. And so where you would see the fossil fuels is if we were buying corporate notes or corporate bonds from some of these corporations who are in these businesses. And so the language that we use for the policy, really made it clear that we're talking about, corporations whose major source of business are fossil fuels, etc., firearms, guns, weapons.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that explanation.
Thank you very much. I did have a follow-up question in that same area. Will you be watching, I guess, a lot of this is going to be in some sort of portfolio investment type index. I'm not sure if I'm describing it correctly, but a lot of different companies and things that you'll be investing these reserve funds. Is there any monitoring in case there's things that those companies would be found guilty of any type of, like, say, pollution or water contaminants and things like that? Are you be tracking things along those lines?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Director Cox. Essentially, we have a team that is dedicated to ESG mandates and SRI policies. And so they track the issuers on our approved list to ensure that they are consistent with the ESG and SRI mandates that we have in place, so that it is something that is consistently tracked. Each of the investments that we purchase or would purchase on behalf of AVA would be individually sourced. So we have no intention, for example, of investing in a broad index of securities. We'd be able to buy and sell individual bonds on your behalf. So that gives us the flexibility to enter or exit positions depending on the compliance that that issuer has with the stated policy and investment objectives.
Oh, I see. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So it'd be based on the bonds and that particular index or fund the bonds. I'm still, I guess, not clear. So we're buying bonds. Is that what we're doing to keep in the reserves specifically? Is that what it's addressing? The direction from the investment policy?
It is one of the available options, but not necessarily required. And that's where, we could, refine this a little bit further if we so wish. Monique, I think, can speak more on to the types of classes of instruments that are available.
Mhm. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
I use bonds in particular because I think that's where we'll run into the SRI policy the most with corporate bonds, but also in the investment policy include things like US Treasury investments, federal agency investments, certificates of deposit, for example, and other types of securities that would be allowed.
Okay. Got it. And then there is no foreign investment, right? You're not doing any of your instruments are not involved with any foreign currency or governments or things like that. Is that correct?
That's correct. The California Government Code limits investment types to US domiciled, for example. So you may see a Canadian bank, but it would be the New York branch of the Canadian bank, for example. And the Government Code is very specific to limit foreign currency or other risks.
Okay, that would be great. I appreciate that. And maybe update that with that part of the presentation to reflect that if it comes before the board as noted. So that's kind of clear as we look at that. I know that probably the package is probably 300, 200 pages, but and I appreciate the summary, just maybe adding a couple other points that could come up in discussion at our general board meeting. Are there any other comments, feedback? And at this point, we didn't have any public speakers. So are we ready to make a motion regarding these recommendations?
Chair Cox, I'm happy to make a motion. I move that we recommend to the board the Treasury Manager selection and the investment policy as stated, as set forth in the staff report and as discussed today.
Second.
Great. It's been properly moved and second. And clerk, could you please take the roll call?
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Core,
Aye.
Chair Cox.
Aye.
Recommendation is approved.
Great. And so that will conclude our discussion on item number 9. And we will now move on to item number 10, which is the credit rating affirmation. And this is an informational only item.
Yes. Right, so if you can pull up the credit rating report itself, I can briefly speak to that. I know we're nearing the end of our time here, and this will be a fairly brief informational item. So, for a quick background reminder, we received our initial credit rating of an A with a stable outlook from S&P back in December of 2021. And they have a regular process of monitoring that regularly and doing a sort of an affirmation of that rating every 2 years. So that's part of the service that we have with them. No major or material changes on this affirmation. We have an A rating and a stable outlook from S&P that has been maintained, and that was released in December of 2023. So that's good news. Rice, if you actually go to page 4, there's an outlook section, and that's primarily what I'll highlight here. Maybe even just zoom in a little bit. I won't cover all the details here. Much of this is a summary of our CCA, so information that will be you all be quite familiar with. I think the outlook section is probably the one that's more worthy of highlight and discussion here. As I noted, it is a stable outlook. That's good news. A lot of the commentary and discussion and analysis that S&P does looks at us in comparison to PG&E, looks at our competitiveness, looks at our liquidity, and these are some of the items that are highlighted in this outlook section. I think the things that they generally talk about from a risk perspective is the ability for customers to opt out of our service to the extent that we are not competitive. So when they talk about and comment on the downside scenario, they're largely talking about, what is the financial risk that we have, what are power supply costs, and whether Ava Community Energy is able to maintain competitiveness from a rate perspective relative to PG&E. So those are the big factors there. Obviously, we're very conscious and focused on managing our power procurement costs to ensure that we can continue to remain competitive in what we have been seeing in terms of this rising energy cost environment. We have definitely been able to maintain competitiveness and, in fact, increase our value proposition. So that's good news. On the upside scenario, what they really talk about is liquidity more than anything else. No surprise, that is the biggest focus of S&P as they evaluate us, is what is our cash balance, what is our available bank line, and what are our operating costs. Our operating costs are largely focused on energy costs, which is the largest portion of our annual operating costs. And I would say the big thing they focus on there's upside scenario is if we continue to maintain and really strengthen our liquidity position, there is a potential to improve our credit rating. It's noteworthy that no CCA out there has a rating above an A as of today, at least. Obviously a longer operating history and improved liquidity may change that. Certainly we hope that we are able to improve upon that, but this is a worthy thing to highlight to the board specifically. I mean, this is where decisions around our rate setting, around value proposition, around continuing to accrue to our reserves is important as it relates to both maintaining our credit rating as well as if we have an interest in improving that credit rating. So really important fundamental governance questions of do we continue to add to our reserves. At this stage, we have not quite hit that 50% reserve target that we have set forth in our policy with sort of a wider bound of 25 to 75%. And so I think we are clearly moving in that positive direction of getting towards that 50% level here in the near term, in the next kind of 1 to 2 year time frame, as we continue to see strong margins. And I think at some stage here, probably the nearest term, we'll want to have an active discussion with the board to understand what do we do as we near that 50% mark. Do we continue to accrue with a target of 75%? Do we start to readjust our value proposition? Do we allocate some other manner, adjust our rates, et cetera? So I just wanted to flag this. That's, of course, a really important topic that we'll revisit with the board in the nearish future. But as it relates to the credit rating affirmation, overall good news, but that's one of the things that they interestingly highlight is, they obviously look a lot at liquidity, and they specifically call out, how are we able to stay competitive? And the last sentence of that upside scenario is they look at, whether management opts to enhance rate competitiveness and not increase liquidity, then the potential for a stronger rating is less likely. So they, of course, are always hesitant to give very specific targets there. So it's not as if we know a numerical target will result in a certain outcome, but directionally that's their commentary. And I think that's really it for in terms of highlights. We do plan to just share this as probably a consent item in the March board meeting as well, just to ensure that all board members have it, but do not plan to have it as a discussion item.
Great. Thank you so much for this good report and maintaining. At this time, let's see if there's any members of the public that would like to make comments. And I'm just watching our time. It's 2:58.
We have no members of the public with their hand raised. We have one member of the public with their hand raised.
Okay.
Local Clean Energy Alliance, you are recognized for 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I really appreciate the discussion about both the bonds and then also the credit rating of the agency. Just reflecting that it is a very healthy agency. But one thing I wanted to mention is this opened up kind of some history again with the agency, is that I know folks with Public Bank of the East Bay were initially talking about the bonds and the credit rating and how all of this is helpful in terms of doing more local clean energy investments. And I don't remember all the details back then, but I do think that that is an opportunity for this agency to start doing a lot of the local investments that we've been wanting to see and that are highlighted in your local development business plan. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers?
There are no other speakers at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll bring it back to the directors. Any discussion? No? Okay, no?
No.
Okay, well, at this time, then we will move on to item number 11, which is the committee members and staff announcements. Anything to be placed on future agenda items for our subcommittee? No? Okay. No, is that a no in the room there?
No, I don't think, yeah.
Okay. And I guess, is there any comments or any additions, Director Carr?
I don't have anything, Chair Cox.
Okay. So at this time, I would like to point everyone to go back and look at the website of AVA Community Energy. There are some events happening on the 16th and 17th and throughout the month. It looks like even St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, which is one of our members organizations that's part of AVA, and they have some other things with Oakland Roots and a summit. So take a look at that and see if there's opportunities for us to support those events. And also want to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day that's coming up. And also I'd like to wish all the women on our board of directors, AVA Community Energy staff, and all of our representatives and the public a very happy Women's History Month. And I want to honor those that have come before us, those that are present with us, and to inspire the future. But also it takes strong women to be with strong men. And so let's continue to work together for a better community.
Thank you.
So at this time, our next Financial Administrative Procurement Subcommittee, the meeting will be held on Wednesday, May the 8th, 2024 at 1 p.m. And I want to thank everyone for coming today. And right now, I will close out the meeting at 3:02 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.